Okay, so picture this. You decide you want to build the safest house on the block, the most inclusive.
Right.
You hire an architect, you get the blueprints, you have the absolute best intentions, you are ready to go. But just as you pick up the hammer, the building inspector rushes in, waves a red flag.
And just slaps a giant stop work sticker on the front door.
Exactly. Not because they don't want a safe house, but because they're worried your specific blueprints might, I don't know, cause the walls to fall in on the people inside.
That is a remarkably accurate metaphor for what just happened in the Indian legal system. It is a classic case of a stop work order on a massive social project.
I try my best. But seriously, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a huge developing story out of India. The Supreme Court has officially hit the pause button on a major set of regulations for university life.
We are talking about the 2026 University Anti-Discrimination Regulations. They were issued by the University Grants Commission, or, the UGC.
And the UGC isn't just some small advisory board, right?
Oh, no. They control the purse strings. They set the standards. When the UGC speaks, Indian universities, they usually listen.
Usually. But this time, the reaction wasn't compliance. It was chaos. And this is a really tricky one because on the surface, these rules sound like exactly what everyone wants.
Daisy.
A clear way to handle problems. But then you look at the news, and there are protests, there's backlash, and now the highest court in the land has stepped in to say, hold on a minute.
It creates this core tension that's really fascinating to analyze. You have the stated goals of the regulations,
Safety and fairness.
right, clashing violently with the public reaction, which claims these very rules actually endanger fairness.
So our mission today is to unpack exactly what these 2026 rules proposed, why they sparked such intense protests about fairness and misuse, and this is the part that blows my mind. What it means that universities now have to travel back in time to operate under rules from 2012.
It's a legal and social puzzle, and it really highlights the difference between, having a good idea and writing good policy.
Exactly. So let's start with the good idea. Let's look at the intent. Because I think it's important to establish that the UGC didn't just wake up one morning deciding to be the villain.
No, not at all.
When they drafted these 2026 rules, what was the sales pitch? What were they trying to achieve on paper?
Well, if you look at the government's presentation, the objectives were quite noble. The primary goal was to make campuses more fair and safe for everyone. They wanted to create a standardized environment where discrimination just doesn't fly.
Which, I mean, who is going to argue with that? I would like less fairness, please, said no one ever.
Precisely. And they weren't just offering platitudes or suggesting people be nicer. They proposed specific mechanisms. The rules mandated that every college had to set up specific centers and committees.
So not just a suggestion box in the hallway next to the water cooler.
No, actual infrastructure. We're
Uh-huh.
talking about liaison officers, anti-discrimination cells, specific committees in every single institution. These bodies were designed to hear complaints and, crucially, to fix problems. The idea was to have a dedicated place where a student or staff member could go if they felt they were being mistreated.
It sounds a bit like bringing a corporate HR structure into the university setting, a formalized way to say, here is where you go when things go wrong.
That's a fair comparison. And they were pretty specific about the categories of mistreatment, right? The rules aimed to stop unfair treatment based on caste, religion, gender, and disability.
Okay, so let's just lay this out. You have a rule book that says we will protect you from discrimination based on these 4 things, and we will build a committee in every building to make sure it happens. On the surface, that sounds like a victory for student rights. It sounds like progress.
It does, and that's why the intent is rarely the part that gets criticized in these situations. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, in the world of policy, intent often clashes with implementation. You can intend to build a shield, but if you design it poorly,
It can be used as a sword.
or it turns out the shield only covers half the people.
Exactly. Which brings us to the first major hurdle, the controversy. Why were people protesting a rule that was meant to stop discrimination? It just seems so counterintuitive.
It does, right. If you see a headline saying students protest anti-discrimination rules, you assume there must be a mistake. But the devil is always in the definitions.
Always.
And the first big explosion of backlash came from the specific wording about caste discrimination. This is the whole definition of victim issue.
Now, for listeners who might not be fully steeped in the context of Indian society, caste is a massive, complex historical system.
Absolutely. It's a system of social stratification with deep, deep historical roots. In modern India, to address historical wrongs, there are specific constitutional categories.
Right.
You have scheduled castes, often called SCS scheduled tribes, or STs and other backward classes, or OBCs.
Right. These are groups that have historically faced systemic marginalization, and the 2026 regulations use these specific categories in the text.
They did. But here is the snag. The source material notes that the new rules defined caste discrimination in a very specific way. The wording seemed to imply that only students or staff from those groups, SCs, STs, and OBCs, could be considered victims of caste discrimination.
Wait. So if I'm a student who doesn't fall into one of those categories, let's say I'm from what's called a general category,
Mhm.
and I feel I'm being targeted or harassed based on my caste identity, the rules don't apply to me.
That was the interpretation, and that was the fear. The implication was that the law was recognizing discrimination as a one-way street.
I see. So the backlash wasn't, we want to discriminate. The backlash was, hey, wait a minute, your definition of fairness is excluding a huge chunk of people.
Exactly. Some students and groups felt completely left out. Their grievance was that the definition was inherently unfair because it failed to acknowledge that discrimination can be complex and multidirectional.
So by defining victims so narrowly,
You effectively alienate parts of the population the rules are supposedly there to serve.
it creates an us versus them dynamic, doesn't it? Instead of saying nobody should be harassed, it sounded more like only these people can be harassed.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And in a diverse university environment, that creates immediate friction. It made people feel like the regulations were not impartial laws, but rather identity-based policies that favored some over others.
So that's the who. The protests were about exclusion, but looking at our notes, there was another layer to this. It wasn't just about who was protected, but about how the rules were enforced.
Yes, this is the second controversy.
Hmm.
The fear of misuse and the questions around due process.
The weaponization fear? I saw this in the research. People were worried these rules made it too easy to file complaints.
That's the crux of it. Students and faculty raised concerns that the threshold for filing a complaint was too low, and at the same time, there were insufficient checks and balances to verify those complaints.
So the fear is that I could just accuse you of something because I don't like you, or we had a bad breakup, or we're competing for the same scholarship, and the system would just automatically grind into gear against you.
And that there weren't enough protections for the accused. In any legal system, you have to balance the ease of reporting with a presumption of innocence. The protesters argued that these rules tip the scales way too far.
A guilty until proven innocent scenario.
That was the fear. Exactly. A genuine anxiety that without robust protections for people who might be wrongly accused, the system could be abused. The concern was that the system was so victim-centric that it might automatically believe the accuser and punish the accused before the facts were even fully established.
And in a university, the punishment isn't just a fine, it's your reputation, it's your degree.
Your whole future.
And the scope was an issue too, wasn't it? I read something about everyday disagreements.
Yes, this raises a really important question about what we should even regulate. There was a fear that these rules could be applied to just normal, everyday disagreements on campus.
Like, if we argue about politics in the dorm room, suddenly it's a federal case.
Potentially. If a regulation is vague enough, a roommate dispute or an academic debate could be reframed as a discrimination violation.
I can see why that would make people nervous. You don't want a campus where everyone is walking on eggshells, afraid that a simple argument could end their career. It sounds like a nightmare for academic freedom.
It's the chilling effect. If I'm afraid that my words will be twisted into a legal complaint, I stop talking, I stop debating, and that destroys the intellectual culture of a university.
But we should be clear here. We aren't saying the rules were definitely going to be used that way.
Yeah.
We're reporting the factual basis of the protests.
Correct. We are reporting the fear. The fear was that the threshold for a violation was too low or too vague. And in law, vagueness is a killer. If I don't know exactly where the line is, I can't feel safe.
So you have a situation where one side says we're protecting the vulnerable and the other side says you are creating a weapon that can be used against anyone. It's a total deadlock.
And that deadlock is exactly why the Supreme Court had to intervene.
So let's talk about that intervention. The Supreme Court looks at this whole mess, the protests, the definitions, the fears, and they make a ruling. What was the verdict?
The verdict was a hard stop. The Supreme Court specifically decided to stop the rules from being used, quote, at least for now. It's an interim stay.
And they didn't just say stop because they felt like it. They cited the exact reasons we were just talking about.
He did. The court's justification was quite validating for the protesters. They explicitly stated that the rules were found to be unclear or vague.
There's that word again? Vague.
It's the enemy of good law. The court also acknowledged the validity of the concerns regarding potential misuse. By doing so, they signaled that the government hadn't done enough to prove that the accused would be protected.
So the 2026 rules are frozen in a block of ice, but colleges still have to run, right? You can't just have no rules.
No, you can have a vacuum. And this is where we get that time machine effect you mentioned. The practical consequence of this ruling is that colleges are now ordered to revert to the old rules.
The 2012 rules.
That's right, the regulatory framework from 14 years ago.
That is just wild to think about. 2012, I mean, think about how different the conversation around social justice and identity was in 2012 compared to now.
It is a lifetime in academic years. Think about it. In 2012, smartphones were still relatively new. The Me Too movement hadn't happened yet, the way we discuss gender identity, the nuance of online harassment.
None of that is reflected in the 2012 handbook in the same way.
Not at all. So, practically speaking, for a student walking onto a campus in Delhi or Mumbai today, if they face harassment, the mechanism to handle it is a handbook written before many of them were even teenagers.
That seems inefficient, to say the least.
It might be outdated, yes, but, and this is the key legal point, it is considered stable.
Stability over innovation.
Exactly. When the innovation to the 2026 rules is considered dangerous or vague, the law retreats to the last known safe harbor. The 2012 rules, for all their flaws or age, are a known quantity. The courts know how to interpret them. The colleges know how to run them.
So we've traded a vague but modern system for an outdated but clear one.
That is exactly the trade-off. And it highlights just how badly the drafting of the 2026 rules failed. The court decided it was actually safer for students to live under a 14-year-old code than to risk the chaos of the new one.
It really shows how high the stakes are. Because the new rules were so controversial, we have to go back to a system that might be obsolete just because it's the only stable thing we have.
Stability often trumps innovation in the eyes of the law, especially when that innovation threatens due process.
So what happens next? Is this it? Are we stuck in 2012 forever, listening to Gangnam Style and using the old handbook?
No, thankfully not. This is just a pause. We have a date. The Supreme Court is set to hear more arguments on the new rules on March 19th, 2026.
Okay, mark your calendars, March 19th.
And at that point, there are really three possible outcomes. First, the court could allow the 2026 rules to proceed as written.
Which seems unlikely given they just called them vague and paused them.
Unlikely, but possible if the government can provide a convincing enough argument. Second option, they mandate changes to the rules. They could say, fix the definition of caste to be neutral, add protections for the accused, and then you can use them.
The do your homework over again option.
Precisely. And frankly, that is a very common outcome in these cases. We like the idea, but fits the text.
And the third option?
The third option is that they keep the rules blocked permanently. They strike them down, and the UGC has to go back to the drawing board entirely.
So we are in a true limbo state.
We are. The legal landscape of Indian universities is in a state of suspension.
It's fascinating because it forces us to ask, what is better? An imperfect old rule or a well-intentioned but flawed new rule?
And the Supreme Court has answered that for us, at least for now. The imperfect old rule is safer than a vague new one.
So let's bring this all together. We started with the news. The Supreme Court halted the 2026 UGC anti-discrimination regulations.
We unpack the intent to create safety and infrastructure for handling complaints about caste, religion, gender, and disability. A noble goal on paper.
But we saw that the execution led to massive controversy.
Right. Controversy part one, the exclusion. The definition of caste discrimination seemed to suggest only specific groups like SCs, STs, and OBCs could be victims, leaving everyone else feeling unprotected and alienated.
And controversy part two, the fear of misuse, the idea that everyday disagreements could become offenses and that the accused had no way to defend themselves.
Which led to the court calling the rules vague and hitting the reset button back to 2012.
It really illustrates the difficulty of legislating social behavior. We all agree we want fairness, but writing a sentence that defines fairness without accidentally creating unfairness somewhere else, that is incredibly hard.
It is the central challenge of modern governance. How do you protect everyone without silencing anyone? How do you stop discrimination without creating a system that discriminates by exclusion?
It raises a really provocative thought for you to chew on. We usually think of discrimination as an action, something someone does to someone else. But this entire saga proves that the definition of discrimination can be a battlefield.
Correct. If we can't agree on who is allowed to be a victim, can we ever truly build a system that provides justice?
That's the question. If the goal is to make campuses fair, can a regulation ever truly be successful if the definition of discrimination itself is viewed by the public as discriminatory?
It's a paradox. And until March 19, 2026, it's a paradox without a solution.
Well, on that cheery note of legal limbo, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's a complex topic, but hey, now you know why everyone is talking about 2012 again.
Always a pleasure to connect the dots.
Keep asking questions, keep reading, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.